Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's webinar. I am your host, Dr. Jed Appleruth, talking to you tonight about testing, all things testing for those of you who have kids coming up upon that college admissions process, thinking about, should I test? Should I submit my test scores? How do they fit? What does it mean? Well, hopefully I'll answer a lot of your questions this evening. We're going to wait. I see the room still filling up, so we'll give folks about another 30 or 40 seconds to fill in. We're going to have some Q&A at the end, and just a little bit of a introduction. My style of delivery is I like giving a lot of information, and then a lot of slides. We're going to share with you the recording. So if I move a little bit quick, that is my tendency, but you're going to have a chance to go back and watch any parts again, slow things down, press pause, all that stuff. So I think the room is starting to hit a plateau right there. So why don't we jump in and begin? And for Q&A, I'm going to probably answer a lot of questions you're coming with. But that being the case, there's a Q&A window, which I'm going to have open. And but I'll probably answer the vast majority of questions, and not all of them at the end. But if a question strikes you, type it in the Q&A box. We'll save it, and then I'll come in and make sure I address it. And again, you'll be receiving a recording of this by Friday or by Monday. All right, let us do it. All right. Okay, here we go. So the questions, when we built the webinar, we said there were 5 questions. Why have the admissions rates gone down? What does this optional mean? How will sending my scores affect or not affect my chance for admissions? What role do grades and course selection play? And what's up with this new digital SAT? So I promise I will address these 5 questions and more with our hour. So just broadly, we mentioned academics, where things fit in terms of testing and grades and so forth. This is give a caveat, it's dated. There hasn't been a new post-pandemic factors in admission released by NACAC. That apparently is coming this either this fall. They promised us, and we'll see where testing fits. But grades are always first. That's been the case for a long time. Grades are first. The core academic grades are key, like your histories, your Englishes and maths. Then you have the strength of the curriculum, academic rigor, how many advanced classes. There's definitely been a lot of interest in rigor in the past 15 years, as more and more of the flagship state schools and more private schools want to see more rigor. They want to see more APs. It's funny, we were talking this morning about that. In response, the College Board is kicking out more APs, and they announced the pre-calculus AP, and we had a discussion among our team. It's like, wait a minute, is that even a college level class? The colleges care about pre-calc AP? Is that more than parents? They understand that the game is, they want to see more rigor, and that's a way to show that. Maybe it might get you out of college algebra, but anyhow, there's a lot more focus on rigor and pushing to more advanced classes. After those 3 things, after grades, core grades, and then rigor, you have testing. And these numbers are going to change. This is all 2018. So those who place considerable importance, that's mid-40s, moderate 37. So we have 8 out of 10 schools put considerable or moderate importance on testing. That number is going to drop. I guarantee it. When we finally get our first survey post-pandemic. So we're waiting on that data. They survey about 250 schools or so, and then they release this information. After that, things drop off quite a bit. Essay, demonstrated interest, counselor recs, teacher recs, activities, and so forth. But you see, on the first pass is academics, and if you don't have the grades and the rigor, it's hard to get into a college because they're most worried for their rankings about graduation rates. They want to make sure people can finish in 4 or 6 years, and if kids transfer out or fail out, it actually hurts their rankings. So if you don't have the academic chops, the rest doesn't really matter all that much, unless you have a key talent the school wants, and then they'll work with you if you're going to help them win games or things like that. So grades are key. They cannot be underestimated. They are first. The grades are weak, and the rigor is light. It's going to be tough to get into these top schools. That being said, grades have gotten higher in the past 20, 30 years. Used to be grades were relatively rare. Now they're relatively common. There's been a lot of pressure from parents of this generation. I hear my daughter over there, pardon me for a second. There's a greater abundance of A's. So the question becomes A's in what classes? Not just we have all A's, but okay, A's and then what rigor goes with that. So that is definitely a shift, seeing more A's than there used to be. In rigor, I mentioned it's a big deal. This was data from UGA. I live in Atlanta. And for their early action program, this blew my mind. I've been in this space for 23 years. And, the word in the street used to be to get into UGA, Georgia, you wanted to see around three AP classes. That was pretty standard, running around to all the private schools in town. For the early action applicants for Georgia, the middle 50 percentile, it's the middle half of the class, had between 8 and 13 advanced classes. So it's like, holy cow, APs, IBs, dual enrollment, those have skyrocketed since I started in this space in 2001. So again, rigor's up big time. Great trends. How you do as a junior matters a lot more than as a freshman. Then as you get towards more advanced classes, the grades are more impactful because they're more college-like classes. And how you did ninth grade seems like 1,000 years ago when you're applying to college. But if you had a really, really rough junior year, they're nervous. And most kids are applying early somewhere. So your grades as a junior are the most important grades because that's the nearest, to when you're going to be in college with the most college-like content. So as a senior, if you're applying to college, in October and getting in, they don't even see those grades as a senior. So junior grades, they're a big deal. Then, so the name of the game is balancing rigor and GPA. You want to, you don't want to push rigor so hard your GPA crumbles, but also you don't want to push GPA, just go for such a light academic load that you have a 3.95, but you have very little academic rigor. That's not going to get you into schools that are very selective. So they want to see that balancing act. They want to see A's and B's and your AP and dual enrollment classes. And as you go to more selective schools, they want to see more A's than B's, obviously. Trends in admissions, application numbers, they are up. The pandemic really, and then there is a break here because you have the haves and have-nots in college. The schools that are very selective just became more selective. And one of the big things was colleges went test optional. And when schools went test optional during the pandemic, when kids couldn't go for testing, all these kids who had good grades, and again, high A's are pretty common, they said, and at very weak test scores, they all submitted. So the flood of the applications to these top schools went, it came, and the schools got more selective. So it is harder to get in than it used to be to many of these schools. When I applied to Penn in '93, the acceptance rate was, around 30%. Now if you're applying regular decision, it's, the mid single digits. So it's pretty wild how much, tougher the light schools have become. Same number of seats. And also they've been letting in more international applicants and they're focusing more on diversity, equity, and inclusion and access. So, it's definitely tougher than it was in the 90s getting into some of these schools. So with that being said, for kids applying to selective schools, there are more kids who see that it's harder to get into schools. If my odds are 1 in 10, then why don't I apply to more schools? Which then further drives, then more application numbers go up and schools become more selective. And we're seeing some kids applying to 20 schools, which was unheard of years ago. But now they're like my normal 10, and then I'll go for my reach 10 because they're test optional, and why not? So we're definitely seeing some kids applying to schools where they probably shouldn't be applying to, but because there's no testing, limit for them, they're like, well, why not? Let me apply to Stanford or other places. All right, so more applications, and so the common apps cycled numbers are up, apps are up, and the schools who are selective are now much more selective. That's a thing. Here's a few numbers, and this, I should update this. I actually have a deck with this updated. But like Duke went from 11% a couple years ago down to 4%. Northeastern in Boston went from 20% admission rate, 1 in 5 kids, to about 7%, 1 in 14. So things have gotten harder. Auburn went from 80 to the 40s. So we're seeing schools are getting selective, and this the Ivies and so forth, even more selective. So that's the broader context of where we are. So we have more kids applying. We have focus still as academics on rigor and grades. But testing is still a piece. And testing, I believe, for a long, long time is going to remain a piece. I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon, even though there's been this big push toward test optional. And we'll talk about what that means and how it all fits together. So testing, you still have this, there's 2 lanes. You have the lane for the SAT, you have the lane for the ACT. You have this duopoly in testing, and they overlap about 80%. So when you're prepping for one, you're prepping for the other. So they used to be very, very different. They started off in 1959 when the ACT came out. It was a counterpoint, and it was all about academic and achievement, not about aptitude. but over the years, the tests have blended, and they look more and more similar. There are some key differences, however. One of the main differences is timing. The ACT is a speedier, faster test, which is going to be even further emphasized with the new digital SAT, which is much more spacious. There's a lot more time per question. On the current SAT, you have about 40% more time per question. And that number goes to about 60% more time per question on the digital SAT. So that's pretty profound in terms of timing. So let's talk for a moment about this new digital SAT. It's coming. They've already administered it 3 times internationally, March, May, and June. So we already have scores back from the first 2 administrations. And you know what? It's going really well. And our kids like it, our international students. And we'll talk about what's going on. It's hitting our shores in October for the PSAT, where every student in the country who takes the PSAT, sometime in October, will take a computer-based PSAT on their own device, or a school device, or one provided by the College Board. And and then in December, that'll be the last paper SAT probably ever administered here in the US on national test days. And then the March SAT, it's computer-based. Paper goes away unless you get an accommodation because of a disability where you can't use a computer. So this is a big change, but this is actually kind of old news. The first digital, standardized test was a GRE. This was back in 1993. And then every GRE was digital in 97, and then the GMAT in 98. So this has been around for a quarter century, and little by little, all the tests are going digital, from the LSAT to the MCAT to the DAT. Everything's going digital. Paper is just, and Scantrons came about in the 30s. That's, it's a 90-plus-year-old technology, and it's old school. Computers are where testing is going, so don't be afraid of it. I would say embrace it, and our kids are very facile with their computers. It's not going to really throw them for a loop taking a test with a screen. So the application that kids are going to be taking their tests on is called Blue Book. If you want to, you can go Blue Book. You can type in Blue Book SAT app right now, Google it, and download the application, the very same one they're going to be using for the October PSAT and then the March SAT, the one they're using overseas right now for this test. It's currently out there, so there's no mystery really what it's like. You can find out what it's like in like half an hour little survey. And the way it works, you're going to have your own device. You're going to have your MacBook or your tablet, your IBM, your clone. You're going to download the application. And the application, when you're using it, it locks everything else out, so you can't surf the net. And then it puts you through the test. And then the way it works on test day is you're going to download the test in advance. So on Thursday before the test on Saturday, you can download the whole test. It's going to be encrypted. Strong encryption, then so you can't crack it unless you're some super genius. You go into the test center, they give you a code, then it unlocks your test, then you take it. And so the Wi-Fi needs are so brief, it's really smart. You need Wi-Fi at the very beginning for the code to come in, unencrypt, unlock. That's it. Then you're just going to be on the app. There's no more Wi-Fi needs. At the very, very end of the test, you're going to press submit, upload your data file, and then that's it. So during the test administration, there's no need for Wi-Fi. So even if the Wi-Fi is a little bit spotty in the school, it doesn't matter. I need it for literally a few seconds on the front end, and then a few seconds on the back end. That's it. So, and you're coming in with a charged device. They're going to have backup support if your power goes down, but they're hoping people come in with charged devices. If you're taking with more than time and a half, double time, they're going to have a power cord for you, and so forth. So that's how this thing works. There are 4 practice tests that are currently available. There are 4 Blue Book tests, and there are 4 linear practice tests that are available right now. So the question, why are we going digital? Well, for one, test security is the biggest thing, because there have been many instances over the past 10, 12 years where people got a copy of a fixed form test, they shared the answers, and the test was compromised. We saw an ACT that was canceled on a national test day for students because someone leaked the test form. That happened in 2019 here for the ACT. There have been cancellations of whole nations in South Korea, in Hong Kong, in China, in Egypt, like this. So again, someone bad actor gets a copy of a test, leaks it, and they say this is now canceled for the country. So having paper, it's a massive liability. Also, moving the paper, things get lost in shipment, things get warped, things get misplaced. And it's easier to administer accommodations. with the digital test. Eventually results are going to come back in days, like two or 3 days, here are your results. Because again, there's no paper. It's pretty brilliant. So it's more efficient. Testing and this is a digital adaptive test. So they're going to rather than asking you 120 questions, they're going to be able to ask you like 50 and get to the same place, because they're asking you questions that are tailored for you and your level of ability. So it's, adaptive testing is much more efficient and better for kids. So the test is getting shorter. Total time for administration for the digital test is 2 hours and 24 minutes. That's with a 10-minute break. That's amazing. Also, there's less upfront time of entering all your school code, personal code. That all happens at home. And so it's going to be much more efficient. And you're going to have a calculator always there. You pull it up, the Desmos calculator. I can close it. I can open it up. It's right there if I need it. And reading is also, you're going to have short little mini passages, about 6-7 lines, not 90 lines. And so they're going to have one little passage, one question, and then next. And they're also smashing together verbal. They're blending reading and writing into one section. It's not going to be separate like it has been for since 2005. All right, but the content is by and large the same. We're still testing the same kind of reading, the same kind of math questions, the same verbal grammar questions. So, and the scoring is not changing. If I get a 1450 on the paper SAT, I'm going to get roughly a 1450. The College Board, their pilot showed that the difference between digital and paper was about 14 points. They pulled out 5,500 kids who had just taken a paper test 2 weeks prior, and they gave them a digital test 2 weeks later, and they ran correlations, and it's literally like one question off. So that's why there's no need for any kind of correspondence. They really did a good job equating and calibrating the scores. The timing on the digital SAT is massive. They're giving kids 71 seconds per question and 44 compared to 44 seconds for verbal on the ACT. They're giving you 95 seconds per question for math compared to 60 seconds on the ACT. So they're giving you an extra, 59+% more time per question, which makes it a much less rushed test. And kids acknowledged that and they liked it. This wasn't a rush. So that's a big deal. Here's a structure. You have a 30-minute baseline reading, writing test, and then you have your adaptive. It goes either easier or harder. 10-minute break, then you have your 35-minute math baseline, and then it kicks you into your adaptive, easier or harder baseline, easier or harder adaptive module. That's it. So adaptive, it's section adaptive, which means you start your test, and the first section doesn't change. You can go back and forth, change your answers, but when the time is up, then it calculates your score, and then it feeds you your easier or harder module, which are already preloaded on your machine. And then you have a little break, and then it goes from there. So there's also a thing they're doing called item response scoring, which is different, where for the past 90+ years, there's always been a calculus where every single question had the exact same weight on your final score. There was no differential weighting of items. So question 23 counts the same as question 15, even if one's easy, one's hard. That's changing. And with item response scoring, they're doing this analysis. They're giving kids like 5 questions, and they're running correlations. And if it turns out question 15 corresponds with a 90% accuracy rate of, if you get 15 right, you're going to probably get 16, 17, 18 right. Rather than ask you those 4 questions, they'll ask you 1 and up the weight on that question. And so with that, they're able to ask fewer questions. But that means, it's a shorter test. So if you make lots of careless errors, well, each careless error does count more when you're going from 120 items down to 50. But it also means you get out of there a lot faster, and you're done by 10:30, not done by 12:30. So there are trade-offs, but adaptive testing, essentially, it's a good thing for kiddos. They're going to give us the scoring manual. We think they're going to be, up to 5 different weightings per question, but they're going to give that when they release the full manual later in the year. So again, they give you your baseline section, which has easy, medium, and hard questions. If I do really well, I go to the harder section. If I'm not as well, I go to the easier section. Then the same thing with math. The scoring range, if I get routed to the easier math section or the easier verbal section, my score is capped at around a 650. So, and that isn't that much of a change from the current test, because if I miss 7 questions in a row, 7 on the, I'm not going to get a 700. And so that really isn't that big of a change. But the questions I see are going to be different if I'm routing the easier or harder module. And so it's around 2/3. So the threshold is they're going to give me 20 questions. If I answer 2/3 right, I'm going harder. Under 2/3, I'm going easier. And that's how that works. But scoring is a little bit different because, again, with the item response scoring and also the section adaptation, it's no longer how many did I get right. And here's an example of that. Look at the kid in blue. Kid got 18 questions right on module 1, the baseline module, not as strong, but went to the easier one. Then the student did very well in module 2, got 25 right. So total correct, 43, scaled score, 560. Look at the very top kid, 25 right, crushed the first section, okay? Got them almost all right. Then did very poorly on the module 2, essentially did it like chance, missed the majority of questions. Total correct, 32, scale score, 580. So look at that difference. I get 43 right, I get a 560. I get 32 right, I get a 580. That's because we're answering different questions on different sections. And the kid in the green may have answered all the really tough ones, so that score was higher. So scoring is different. This is going to be a different, a new era for that. And here's an example. Let me show this to you. Focus for a moment on the blue. Look at the blue. The blue is the middle. The blue is the baseline. And I'm going to show you the level of difficulty. So you're going to have level 1 question. You have 2 level 1 questions. You're going to have 10 level 2 questions. You're going to have 7 level 3 and 3 level 4. So, you have a lot of questions in the middle, level 2 and 3. It's mostly a mid-level, but a few easy, a few really hard. Now, if I get about under 2/3 right, let's say I miss half of them, I'm going to the green. Look at the green for a moment. And the green, the level 1 questions, they go from 2 up to 7. Now, here's a bunch of easy ones. The level 2s go from 10 in the baseline module to 9, but the same. My harder questions, I had 7 level 3, now I only have 5. And then I had 3 level 4, now I only have 1. So everything really skews easier, trying to figure out, are you at a 650? Are you at a 570? Are you at a 490? They're trying to figure out where you are, but they're not giving you the super, super hard ones because you already missed, a third of them in the baseline module. Now look at the red, look to the right. The red is the hard module. Look how different that looks from the green module. That's the hard adaptive. So this level 1 questions, I had 7 on the easy module. Now I have only 1 because they're not going to give me the easy stuff. Now they're going to try to calibrate, where are you? Are you at a 660? Are you at a 700? Are you at 750? The level 2 questions went from 9 down to 4. Now the hard ones, I had only 3 on the green. Now, I'm sorry, I had 5 level 3s. Now I have 12. So things are really pushing me towards harder material. And instead of having only 1 level 4 question, now they're giving me 5. So they're trying to figure out, where are you in the hard spectrums? And just take a moment, look at this. So you get the baseline, everyone sees the same question, the same roughly mix of easy, medium, hard in the blue. If I get under 2/3, I'm going to an easier module. If I get more than 2/3, I'm going to a harder module. If you get this, you get the essence of adaptive testing, but with section adaptive, and then throw in the item response scoring, and you kind of get how the scores tease out. All right, there's some questions coming in. I will address all of those, I promise. Now math, again, everything is they're dropping the number of problems on math, especially, and also verbal. And they're really reducing the reading burden. There was a big push towards the Common Core state standards in 2016 towards more reading and math fluency, and there were a lot more word problems. They are really ratcheting back the number of word problems down to 30%. The rest are going to be pure math. Here's the math, solve it, not embedded in this big paragraph. And a lot of kids like that. The calculator Desmos, you have to learn how to use it. It's a very powerful tool. It's a best-in-class graphing calculator, learning about how to find out, where things cross, intersections, really the balance between equations and, quadratic formulas, and other things in algebra 2, and graphing. So Desmos is always there. And if you're taking this test, you have to practice a little bit to learn how to use Desmos, make sure you're fluent, because it's a big deal and it is very helpful. Now, the international rollout, we've had 3 tests now. We've had March, May, and June. And the first one, the international rollout, they only had 60 cancellations, which is fewer than they had in 4 states in the US. The kids got their scores back, most of them within about 10 days, and tech issues were minimal. A few kids had a few issues getting the code downloaded on the very beginning or uploading scores at the end, but that was pretty much it. Otherwise, things were pretty smooth. A couple kids, they had their screens freeze, but then the way this works, every single keystroke is being timestamped. So if I'm at 7 minutes, 18 seconds left, I've answered them all, I'm on number 36. I'm sorry, I'm on number 13. My thing freezes or powers down. When I power it back in and restart it, it goes back to the exact second where it froze and the exact problem I was on. So it's like Google Documents where it's saving and it's time stamping every keystroke. Very cool. And so any kids who had a freezing issue got right back up, lost maybe 5 minutes, they're back on track. So they thought of a lot. They had, time to pretest this. They learned from having to do the AP tests during the pandemic and with some of the issues there, and they've really solved for a lot of issues. Students and administrators seem to like this test. Our kids like it. And on the pilot sample, 8 out of 10 kids who had a paper and a computer within 2 weeks said they preferred the computer. So this is not just, speculation that, only 20% of kids prefer paper for whatever reason. And one of the main things is we like that it's short. We like that it's less speedy. We have more time. It feels less rushed. And we're out by, 11 o'clock. And administrators, they're not matching up the Scantrons with your booklet. They're not doing all this pre-work, handing out, collecting. They're not watching. And also they're not keeping time because the machines keep time. The computers are the ones, the timers are there. You can hide it or see it. So it's easier for them. And they're not there's nothing to pick up. Everyone sits down, they give out a code. And also they have a tablet and they can track real time. When there is Wi-Fi in the school, they can actually track and see every student where they are in the test. And if someone's stuck or frozen, they can see it on their tablet, which is given to every proctor. That's pretty cool too. There are some neat things about having digital testing. And again, shorter tests, shorter passages, more time, always have a calculator and you get results faster. Cool. So the question is, if you're going to be a junior or even some sophomores, do we go ahead and, dive into this digital test, or should we try to get a paper one in? And ultimately, there are several options. So here are some timelines. If you're a rising junior, here's the options. One of them is, let me just get paper and knock it out. I have a paper test through December, which means there's going to be an August SAT. It's going to be October, November, December. I have 4 left. If I want to get one of those in or get them all done, I can do it. And for some of our high-flying students, they want to knock it out, they can do it. Then there's some kids who are going to be hybrid. They may take one test by December and then shoot for a computer-based one in March or in May. And one of my colleagues said it's around a 5-hour prep time to shift from paper to digital, to learn the interface, to make sure you're fluent with Desmos. Because again, so much is the same. It's not like learning a new test, it's learning a new delivery vehicle for very similar content. Some kids may take a practice digital and say, you know what, I'm better at this. It's less rushed. I like this test. It's shorter. And so then you have March, May, June, August, October, November, December. You have 7 administrations. And if you're looking at, doing it early by October, then you have March, May, June, August, and then October. All right. And then some students are going to be better still on the ACT. The ACT is a different test. It is speedier, but some kids are pretty fast. It has a more advanced math, but some kids are good at math. It has also more science. It also has a much lower level of reading. The SAT operates, at 11th grade and above reading level, and the ACT is 9th grade. They're definitely pushing harder passages on the SAT. So some kids really prefer the ACT. And so there are different pathways, different timelines. We kind of laid it out. Everyone in October will be taking that digital PSAT if they're going to be juniors, but still some kids might go ahead and use that as a practice and knock out all their tests by December. The hybrid model is you might go ahead and take a couple of these paper-based ones, but then you take the March for the digital, and some kids may wait until March and then do all digital. Those are your different pathways. All right. Are they going to super score the paper and digital? one of our colleagues, Sean Felton up at Cornell, said yes, they're going to treat them the same. There are many schools who are members of the College Board, and they're going to, if they super score right now, what super scoring is, I'm going to take your best verbal from March and your best math from May, and that become my super score. They're not going to look at scores individually. They'll look at your top, sections together. And some schools will do it, some won't, but we don't yet have that many on record with a policy that's official. But we definitely know some will, but we don't know how many. Now, the ACT, what's their response? They've been administering in the US computer-based non-adaptive versions of the ACT. They've been administering them. They forced everybody internationally out of the US to take them in 2019. Paper ended because of all those scandals and all the cheating. But also they've been administering it for multiple years to districts, even states. Some states use it for like their statewide end of testing, end of course stuff, kind of see how kids are doing. And starting in December of this year, they're going to pilot it for students to have an option of on a national test day to figure out, do I want paper or digital? That's never been a thing. It's always been if your district offers it on a school day, they were doing, computer-based, but now they're giving kids the option. And in 2024, they're going to roll out that option. But honestly, it's not adaptive. It's the exact same. All it is like having a digital PDF. You're not going to have a shorter test. You don't have more time. So there really is not any advantage unless you don't like paper. But with the digital adaptive SAT, it's shorter. You have more time. There are a lot of reasons why kids like it. But this is just, if you want to take it on the computer, you can. But there's maybe get your answers faster. But all the same problems with test security, they're still there. The only fix is on a given test day, they can push different test forms to you, which may be better for security than having a stack of paper that one person can pull one out. But otherwise, it's not that much friendlier for the kids. So, all right. Now, let's shift gears and talk for about 20 minutes or so about test optional admissions and what that means for y'all. So you have the choice. This is now a new world where the pandemic changed the landscape. For the top schools in the country forever and ever, they wanted test scores. But now you choose, do I send my scores or withhold them? Now, test optional, if you don't have a test score, they will consider your application as complete, as whole. So a test is a plus factor. It can definitely add some weight, but you can get in there. There's a very clear lane for kids without test scores. So over, the vast majority of schools in the US are now test optional. And especially those, those top schools who are very selective, the vast majority, with exceptions. So we don't see things ever going back. This is the new world, and we live in this world. There are some who are waiting to make a final call. They're getting more data. They already have 3 years of data, and they're going to get a couple more to figure out, do we make a permanent call? And looking at the outputs, one of the things they're looking for is, are there differences in kids who have test scores, don't have scores in terms of the outputs? Are there differences in GPA over 4 years? Differences in course taking and major selection? Differences in graduation rates? And they're going to know for sure within a year or so. But schools, many of them still like tests and use tests. Again, part of it is a hedge against grade inflation. Kids coming with lots of A's. They still are a strong predictor of graduation rates, and they're helpful for comparing broad, diverse applicant pools. So, and they're a way for kids to differentiate themselves when a lot of kids look the same. If they have really strong scores, that's a differentiator. There are some states that require testing. If you're looking at the Florida schools, all the publics require testing. With Georgia, our flagships do, Georgia Tech and UGA. Tennessee, the flagship school. And then there are several state schools, UNC and Texas, briefly put out announcements saying they were going to require testing for UNC Chapel Hill and Texas at Austin. Then they retracted and said, give us some more time. But they're thinking about it. And then the southern schools, we don't know what's going to happen, like with Alabama, Mississippi, Missouri. One of our colleagues at Georgia Tech said, yeah, the South, expect many of the southern schools to come back over time. So we're waiting on that. And then MIT, they went back a year or so ago, Georgetown, Purdue, some schools are coming back in the fold. And MIT, they said, well, we can't, test scores help us from bringing kids in who are going to fail out. There are kids who have A's in math at their school, but they come here and they can't handle the rigor of our curriculum. And MIT is a very specialized place. Not all schools are like MIT. MIT is test required, Caltech is test blind, and they're very similar. So, test blind for right now. It's a pilot. So again, and then you also have the military academies, the West Points and Annapolis, those Coast Guard, and there are schools like Auburn that are test optional, and it's conditional. That if you have a 3.6 or above, you can choose. And they said we encourage students to we like test scores, they're not required. And this is where you get their language. But under a 3.6, you must send test scores. So that's called conditional optional. All right. And then Cornell says, when they first came out, they said, if you don't have test scores, we are going to look at everything else more closely, which is just logical, because test scores are, one leg of the stool. If you pull a leg out, there's more weight everywhere else. So I'm going to look at other testing, like AP exams. Those become more important. Essays, Brex, activities, other things like that. All right. And then there are a small number of schools who, I don't care how good your score is, it's not part of the equation. There are about 70 schools. Half of them are in California, UC and Cal State, that are test blind. And then 17 are piloting blind. And then, so that's about 84 of 2,500 colleges. So 3% of colleges in the country that are the four-year schools are test blind. That's still a small number, but if I'm looking at California, that's a big deal. And then there are a few other ones. I mean, some of them are small, like the pilots, CUNY, Dickinson, Idaho, Reed, Washington State, Boise, Pitzer. And then some permanent ones like Washington, I said that twice, Catholic, Worcester Poly, St. Mary's, so forth. Now, it's important you understand that test optional and test blind are not the same thing. We'll talk about that. Having a strong test score can make a difference, and some schools a big difference. So that's important. We are also waiting on these lovely 9 people to hand down a court case with the affirmative action ruling for UNC and for Harvard. There's going to be some nuance in how they frame this thing. It's not necessarily binary, but if they make it illegal to consider it in even the most narrow sense race in college admissions, that may affect some schools' decision to be test required or even test optional, because part of it, if there are differences by ethnicity and race in terms of test scores, and you want to maintain diversity on campus, then saying you cannot consider race means we have to, then can I look at these 2 students who have very different test scores, and in my efforts to build diversity, is that going to be a problem? And if that's going to be an issue, then some schools will say, well, we can't be test required. Or some may say we can't be test optional. We'll go with test blind. So this is coming down either tomorrow or between tomorrow and the end of June. So next Friday, that's when they go on their summer hiatus. And we'll find out what this means. And then we'll write about it in our newsletter. And especially as colleges respond to this, that's a big deal for us. All right. So test scores also can affect merit-based aid. There are many colleges, they give financial need-based aid, but also many colleges trying to attract good applicants, they give out money for good grades and good test scores. One example I give out is Alabama. And I know they have given out over $110 million in merit-based aid, and they've transformed their school. My niece applied from Richmond, and she ended up getting a 1390 on the SAT. And she applied, and her tuition would have been $30,000 from Richmond. Instead, tuition went down to $6,000. So they offered her $96,000, but for her test score and her 3.5 GPA. So Alabama wants good test scores because they also understand that kids with good test scores, it affects the quality of the student. It also affects the quality of the graduate and many other things down the road in terms of active alums and so forth. So other schools, some of them, Utah State, there are a few out there, but you can look and research, ask the schools, do you have any merit-based scholarships? Zell Miller, here in Georgia, if you have a 3.7 GPA and a 26 ACT or 1200, then you have free tuition. And that's a big deal. You don't want to lose it though. I have some kids who have a bad first year, drop below 3.3, then they're crawling back up, trying to get back on that free tuition. And the Zell is pretty sweet in the Hope Scholarship. All right, so then the question becomes, to have a test score, do I send it? And you only want to send a score that's going to strengthen. You don't want to send a weak score for any reason. And there are, the rates of submission Submission rates are around half. Around half of the kids in the country, a little lower than half, send test scores, half don't. Schools that are more selective, more kids submit. So here is some data from the it's dated, but from the Common App, they were showing that schools that are the more selective, more aggressive publics, about 2/3 of kids send test scores, and so forth. All right, and it's more about strategy. Do I send test scores? Well, are they good? And then are they good for this school or not for this school? So my niece, again, applied to, I think, about 9 schools. She sent test scores to 5 and not to 4. Like Tulane was very clear with her. Tulane said, anything less than a 1430, don't send it. And she heard that in one of the, when they came to her school, she had 1390, she didn't send it, and she got into Tulane. And they actually offered her, about 15,000 off in merit-based aid. It's still very expensive, it's like 80 grand. So she ended up going out to Tulane. But in the grand scheme, kids are more and more kids are sending scores to some, but not all schools. And it matters by major that like engineers, a lot of engineers send test scores trying to showcase their math skills. Same thing for business, for kids who are applying to, finance, that's advanced math and calculus. A much smaller number of kids are sending scores if they're applying to education majors, social work, history, other things. But the fin, the business kids, engineering kids, many of them, the majority of them are sending their test scores. All right, now the question becomes, did it matter? The test scores make a difference. Now here is an extreme example. At Boston College, they like test scores. So 17,000 kids applied to BC, 5,000 with test scores. 5,000 kids got in with test scores, an admit rate of about 30%. 23,000 kids applied to BC without test scores. Only 2,500 of them got in, an admit rate of 11%. So it's almost 3x. So there's clearly a preference for kids with test scores. I want to mention something. There is it's not that big of a difference because there's something going on here too. It's called collinearity or correlation. Like kids who send test scores are kids sending strong test scores. Typically, kids with strong test scores tend to have stronger grades and course taking. So there is that factor, but that's the collinear correlational piece. But also there's causation where you have 2 kids from the same high school, similar course taking. One kid sends a 1480, one kid has no testing. Looking at that, apples to apples, the kid at a school like BC, the kid with that strong test score will have an advantage based on the policies of that admissions office. In terms of other admissions offices don't have that level, that 3x, this is extreme. But here are some schools that do seem to have a preference. UVA, the new number, this is like a year old, the new data is actually over 100%. So UVA seems to like test scores. Notre Dame, pretty clear. Boston College. Fordham, it's not nearly as strong of an advantage. Tufts, it's about a 40% pop, but not double or triple. Barnard, smaller advantage. Wellesley, Emory's about double. Colgate's more than double. So you see some of the philosophies where it looks like they're looking at these scores with a little bit more, I guess, scrutiny. They're definitely a bigger factor because there are some schools where there's less of a difference, some schools where it's more of a difference. So that's part of it. So I think scores do matter and can help at certain schools, especially schools that are more selective. So the question is, do I send my scores? Well, first get your baseline, get your SAT, ACT scores. And then if you're in this strange year where there's 2 options, go ahead and spend 2 hours, get a baseline digital if you don't mind. It's a way to just kind of compare them all. It's pretty quick. Find out, are my scores within range? Are they going to make me competitive and more attractive to a school? If my scores are well below their mid-50 range, don't bother. Don't, I wouldn't go that path. Do you want them to see it is the question. And again, STEM kids, they seem to weigh and be a bigger factor for STEM kids, both on the submission side and the acceptance side. Rick Clark, colleague, friend, author, talks about if you have strong scores, send them. If you're in the top half, send them. If you're in the bottom half, it depends. And if you're in the bottom quartile, Rick would say I probably wouldn't send those scores in most cases, unless there was something really exceptional about you in terms of first generation, or you're coming from a place where they have very few applicants, or coming from West Virginia or the Ozarks, and the average test score at your school is 1,000, and you have a 1390, then I might send that one, even though I'm in the bottom quartile for a certain school. But again, that's the edge case there. And also depends upon your GPA. If I have a stellar GPA and only average test scores, I probably want to go and have my GPA be the whole conversation. I had 395, a lot of rigor, but I had a 1250. I probably would hold that back and let them talk about only my rigor and my GPA. However, my grades are decent, but not astounding. I have a 3.6, some rigor, but I have a 1430. Okay, I want that test score in the conversation. And so part of it is that calculus. How strong are my grades relative to my test scores and so forth. Now, section scores matter. If I have a 1390, but I'm applying to a STEM program and I have a 790 in math, well, even if my total global score is below their mid-50 range, I want to make sure the admissions office sees my 790 because that's more impactful for my engineering major than my 600 in humanities and verbal. And then treat every school differently. Again, I have a 1390. I may send it to South Carolina. I may send it to Georgia, and I may send it, but I won't send it to Tulane. I wouldn't send that same score to North Carolina, the UNC Chapel Hill. So just be mindful about your score and where you fit in the range. Here's an example. I pulled Swarthmore. Kid got the mid-50 range is a 1380 to a 1540. That's a very selective school. So where do I want to go? Now, if I get a 1470 or above, send it. Okay. If I get below 1380 or below, I wouldn't send it. However, if I'm in that middle, if I'm in the third quartile, it depends. That's where if I have a 1460, I'm 10 points shy of the mid-50, I'd probably send it. I have a 1390. Well, again, how strong are my grades? Relative, do I have amazing grades? If my grades are rocking, don't send that 1390. If my grades are okay for the school, then I probably I might send it if it's strengthened. So again, that's the whole calculus here, and it varies by school. And here, just giving you some example, there has been a little bit of a pop in test scores during the post-pandemic because it wiped out a lot of the low-scoring kids. About the bottom quarter of students, they understand if I have a low test score, don't send it. So what that's done is it's popped around 30 points, the average. Like Emory went from 1390 to 1510. They went to a 1430 to 1530. Same thing, Colgate popped up. Davidson popped up. You can see some of these small pops because the kids with low scores are keeping the scores to themselves. All right, and I'm going to skip over. In Apple Ruth, we do 3 things. We do academic tutoring, we do test preparation, and we coach students on executive functioning, helping kids make more with their resources. I'm going to do a fast poll. Peter, if you don't mind launching that for a second, I'm going to ask you 3 questions. They'll take you about 25 seconds. If even that, are you a student, parent, or guardian? If so, where are you in the pipeline? Are you a high school senior, junior, sophomore, freshman? Are there any of the services that you're interested in? And do you want anyone to reach out? And that's it. And that takes you about 20 seconds. And then we can shift gears and take questions. 8:48, I have 12 minutes left. And I already have 9 questions teed up. Let me go ahead and begin the Q&A. All right, Alexa, what is the cutoff score? And go ahead and type in your questions in the Q&A window. We have time. What's the cutoff score for competitive colleges, Ivies in the next tier? If you're white in a private school in an affluent community, dear Lord, that's very specific. I mean, the top tier, like the Ivies, it's going to vary by school. There's some, the Princetons and the Harvards and the Yales, a little bit higher than, let's say, the Cornells or Columbias or Browns. It's going to vary, but that score is going to be typically in the 1500s. It's a pretty strong SAT score for those top schools. For someone who doesn't have a hook and they're, there's not something exceptional apart from the, if you're a straight academic applicant, your scores need to be strong. I wouldn't send like a 1430 to Princeton, right? I would apply optional to that school. And again, the odds are pretty low. But yeah, there is no cut score, and it does depend. But those schools, look at their middle 50 ranges, and they're going to be very strong scores because they can be, when Princeton's taking, 4 out of 100 kids, they can be pretty picky. All right, the digital testing is administered, overseas. We've had 3 administrations, March, May, and June, and they've gone off without a hitch. So we've already had 3 official tests, and our kids like them. Can you share the links to the practice tests? All you have to do If you want, there are 4 practice tests on the Blue Book app that are digital. Just type in Blue Book app, a College Board, and you can download it tonight, and they're the 4 tests. The linear practice test, type in on Google, linear SAT practice test, Google it now. And there's a lot of overlap between those 4 paper tests and the Blue Book tests, but that's going to show you the paper. And that, I didn't go into this in detail, but there is an accommodation for a paper-based test if you aren't able to take it on a computer, but that's pretty rare. And we'll learn more about that later. All right, thanks for your time. I have a few clarifications. Do we say yes in the college app during college? All right, so in terms of test optional, again, you get to decide. On the common application, with every time you submit, you decide, do I send scores or withhold scores? It's up to you whether you want to list your test scores. And then if most schools, you get to self-report your scores. And then if you're accepted, they ask you to confirm them by sending an official score report. But you have the choice, and if it's going to be a strong score, then I would say submit it for that school, and weaker scores, I wouldn't send it. Will the SAT score reports indicate if the adaptive module was easy or hard? No. Kids will never find out, unless if you score over a 660, you went to the hard module. If you score below a 460, you went to the easy module. Because that's it. If I'm in the 460 to 650 range, I don't know. But I do know for sure if I get a 720, I went to the hard module. Otherwise, they don't tell you, and the score report doesn't tell you, and you'll never know. All right, for the class of 2024, will the SAT or AST matter for UC, CSU, Ivy League, others? As of right now, for the UCs and Cal State, no, they're blind. They don't look at test scores. So that's, UCLA, UC Irvine, that's, UC Berkeley. So for that school, no, and Cal State, Fullerton, they don't care about test scores. Ivy Leagues care, and like the head of admissions for Yale, Jeremiah Quinlan, he's on the record. He says test scores are the single best predictor of performance at Yale, more than high school GPA. Because there's been so much grade inflation, kids are submitting very similar GPAs. Test scores are a better predictor of who does well at Yale. So do I think test scores matter at Yale? Yeah, I do. And so that being the case, we're all waiting to see what happens with this court case. Is that going to change people's perceptions? I don't know. Will that drive some people who are optional into test blind? We'll see. I think some schools who would have gone test required may not go there if they want to maintain diversity in their class. And they're going to have a hard time justifying why they brought certain kids in with lower test scores if race wasn't a factor. All right. Could you repeat which ones are test optional or test blind? Well, you have 1,800 plus schools in the country that are test optional. You have test required. It's a small number. It's the Florida publics, the Georgia flagships, Tennessee, Purdue, MIT, Georgetown, the military academies. Test blind, it's 34 of the schools. That's UC and Cal State. Then you have, the Worcester Poly. You have, a small number of smaller schools. There's like Washington State, and that's also available if you want to search. Go on Fair Test. There's a guy, Bob Schaefer, who maintains a list of schools. It's called fairtest.org, and it'll show you all the schools that are optional, all the schools that are test blind. He has it right there. He curates that list for the last 20 years. If you attend a non-grade school, do you have to submit your test scores? Again, you're not required, but it does lend some strength if there's for homeschool kids, as an example. What is my mom's grading strength compared to the other school? It's not standardized. So my dad may have given me high marks, but in terms of having a test score validates that. Having a 5 on an AP validates that I have a certain level of proficiency. So when you're coming to a school without grades, test scores can be a differentiating factor and a valuable factor. Though again, it's not required. And there are other ways to demonstrate mastery and ability besides GPA and besides test scores. Thank you for this. When you're getting your baseline, that means you don't study or sweat it and just take the test. Yes, your baseline test is you go in there and take it. I want to find out, am I better on the SAT or the AST? I go in there unprepped, take one of each. And we offer them in Apple Ruth almost every weekend. You can take them, and you can log in, and we can proctor it, time it, grade it for you, give you good feedback on that. It's free at Apple Ruth to do a baseline of each. So we'll help you with that if you want to get a baseline test in. But again, it's unprepped, because if you prep for one, not the other, it's kind of a skewed baseline. I want to have a balanced baseline if I can. Are we going to send you the recording? Yes, we're going to send you a copy of the recording. If you are East Asian, does that mean your score is being compared to other East Asian kids? My kid is not a strong test taker and not a STEM kid. Well, in terms of the admissions office, that's going to depend, but schools who are trying to really privilege diversity may be looking at students within certain bands. And there was research that was out of Yale and Princeton on the Asian penalty, that kids had to do better because that cohort as a group does better with testing than any other cohort in the country. And so the idea was to be competitive if they're allocating a certain number of spots. And it's not quotas, but if race is a factor in trying to maintain a balanced class, they could be looking at you, comparing your student to other students in a similar band. In the same way that they're looking at you in the context of your high school. We want a certain score from this kind of school, whether it's private, inner city, very competitive, or rural, less competitive. They're looking at you in the context of your class. Same thing with course taking. You took 4 APs, but everyone in your class took 4 APs versus you're at Stuyvesant, kids having 13 APs. If I have 4, I'm relatively light for Stuyvesant. So, it's going to depend, but yeah, for sure, they could be comparing you to your zip code, to people who are like you, also by gender. In terms of course taking, girls take a more rigorous course load than guys do. So a girl with 6 APs may not stand out in the same way that a guy might, because females take 25% more APs, things like that. So there are definitely differences by cohort, by type, and they could be looking at that based on the admissions office policy. Do you recommend a schedule for prepping studying? For sure. I mean, typically, I want to start prepping about 10 weeks out, ideally 8-10 weeks out, and then having a session roughly once a week, doing a practice test every few weeks is beneficial, and we can help talk that through if you want to talk to someone about getting a schedule together for your kid. We have advisors here at Appleruth. If my kid's doing well with the ACT, is it worth waiting and taking the digital SAT? Well, what I would say is go download the Blue Book app and have your kid take a practice. It's 2 hours and 20 minutes beginning to end. And then that's it, then you're done. And then compare that percentile to their current scores on the ACT. And it could be, bam, it's an easier paced test, it's a shorter test, and your kid crushes it. Or it could be, no, your kid is just better on the ACT with the lower level reading, the higher level math, and the speed's no problem. So I would say, if you don't mind, take 2 hours, 20 minutes on Saturday, Sunday, knock it out, and then get full data before you decide. With a digital SAT, can the student skip a question, then go back and answer it later? Yes. Within a section, you can go back and forth, change your answers, and then when time's up at 32 minutes, and that goes away. And then you're on to a new module. Within the module, you can go back and forth all you want. Unlike item adaptive, like the GMAT, where it gives you an item, and then you never go back. That's different. How damaging is it to college app to have a D on your report card, but then you're remediated and turned into a B? The rest of the grades are all A's and B's. I understand that private schools and UCs and CA will take an average of those scores, but they will see the D. In California, the state schools wants the D, only the remediated grade. I mean, it's going to depend upon the college, how they view that. If you remediate and do a summer class and turn the D, get an A, and then you have a B average, it varies by school. So I couldn't tell you, it would be inaccurate to say across the US, everyone treats that the same. And so I think you may reach out and query and ask, if it ever happened to a rep from a given school, if you want to find out. You can even ask them anonymously. But that will vary by school, by admissions office policy. Can you use SuperScore with the Zell? No, the Zell Miller Scholarship here in Atlanta, they do not SuperScore. That is one distinction. So I kind of got fuzzy there for a second. Let me actually pause my video just for one moment and start it again. Okay. All right, I'm back. So you can't SuperScore with Zell. Next up, thank you. Oh, you're welcome, my pleasure. I like to do the baseline algorithm, all your times are EST and we're PST. There are ways, write an email, info@Appleruth, and we'll get you set up with a baseline test. We do different times and we'll get you set up for that. Okay. All right, for the class of 2026, that means a rising sophomore. When is the best time to take the SAT? My student took the last one as a freshman, got 1200. Good start. Yeah, that's a great start. So you're freshman, 1200 as a freshman, you haven't even seen all the math yet. There's a lot of algebra and algebra 2. And there's advanced reading on the ST. So I think their kids off to a great start. And I would say typically we don't do much with the SAT as a sophomore, unless a kid is super duper advanced. And then some kids take it at the end of sophomore year. Most of our kids, we say, finish up your sophomore year and then take it over the summer before you're a junior or as a junior. And so I would say, don't sweat it too much at this point. Focus on your grades and just learn the content, and then the test will be there when you're ready. So I really wouldn't sweat it this year. Be a sophomore, get good grades, and then at the end of sophomore year, do a practice test, and you can look at. But I wouldn't think about it for about another 9-10 months. My kids in musical theater, I was too back in the day. Well, most schools require a high GPA and test scores. Well, again, if you're applying to a theater major, like I did a cappella and music and other things at Penn, that was my activity, but it wasn't my major. And so that I had 4 years of musical theater and a cappella and quartet and all the stuff. So that was my activity. And that was part of my essay and writing about things I cared about, but that really wasn't a factor. If you're applying to a program where there's going to be an audition, then those kind of programs, your test scores are going to be lighter. It's more about your audition or your portfolio. If you're applying to a performing arts or a visual arts kind of program, that's your portfolio is everything. But if you're not using, if it's just going to be your activity, then no, your grades and your academic rigor and testing can be very, very impactful. Thank you. Appreciate that we are here. Well, we're glad to be here. We like to help our students and our families. Does Duke superscore? I believe Duke does superscore. What I would do is validate that, go online, go to College Board Big Futures, type in Big Futures and type in Duke. Then there's going to be a tab for applying and then like test scores. It'll tell you the superscore. You can also Google it, go on their website. But they, it's also on their common data set. But I would just right now go on College Big Futures, type in Duke, applying, testing. It'll tell you the superscore. May I ask, how much do activities like high school sports, being captain or being elected to office, does it hold weight? It does hold weight for certain schools. Certain schools are like some of the big state schools are more just what are your grades, what are your rigor testing. But then schools that are more selective, where a lot of kids have really good grades, they do factor in activities. They are looking for leadership somewhere, whether it's leadership in your high school sport or outside, in your youth group or other things like that. They do want to see some leadership. They're trying to figure out, are you going to contribute to one or two things in our school? But it doesn't factor in nearly as much as your grades. If your grades aren't good and your rigor is not strong, then having all the activities in the world won't matter unless you can win Division I football games. But it's those are nice things and they're supplements. That was on the factors for admission. You can probably type in NACAC, NACAC, factors for admission, and it'll give you that slide I showed you. Also, I'll give you, the recording in a couple of days. You'll be able to freeze on that slide. My student took the practice ACST with Appleruth, and we got the Appleruth practice book. Is that book still good to practice for the new digital test? Yes. The content is very, very similar. There are some nuanced distinctions, and we actually are releasing a new digital updated book. But the old Appleruth book is still extremely relevant because, again, the kind of reading questions are still the same kind of reading questions. The grammar questions are still the same kind of, the math. It's very much very applicable. So if you practice with the Appleruth book, because again, the format is changing, but the actual content is very, very, very similar. Thank you. All right. I think we have exhausted all of our questions. So again, if you guys want any help with academic tutoring, test preparation, EF coaching, we are here. We are ready. We'd love to be a resource to you. And after 23 years doing this, I think we're pretty good at our gig. So thanks for being here. Look for a copy of this. And I hope you all learned something. And feel free to share a link to anybody who might want to learn. And there'll be more webinars about this and more webinars about the digital SAT, probably one a month leading up to the October PSAT and beyond. All right, y'all. Everybody have a great night. Thanks so much.